files on this subject be delivered to me so that I could look deeper into it. The letter he wrote me back on February 24th, 1999. Dear Mr. Sarita, enclosed with this letter is my entire file on the matter in question, including the videotape that you so kindly sent to me for my comment. I did not send copies of my email replies to your previous email messages, as I infer from the content of this present letter that you retain your own copies of this correspondence. Since I'm not at all interested in the speculations of Dr. Lou Frank, and since my own research interests do not involve the data sets upon which these speculations are based, I have no other information on these matters other than that enclosed, all of which was sent by you. Signed, Dr. Joseph A. Newt III, Head, Astrochemistry Branch. P.S. Thanks for the great stamps. I had not seen anything like them previously. So at this point, Dr. Newt is saying that there is no other file at NASA, that my investigation that I'm conducting is the only file and the only investigation being done into this phenomena at NASA. I didn't know whether to believe it, but I didn't want to pursue him any further on that particular question, and I wanted to move on with our dialogue and see how much deeper I could go into this investigation. Later, I would have to try to contact Dr. Louis A. Frank myself and try to get a dialogue going with him. On February 25th, 1996, on Space Shuttle mission number STS-75, NASA launched a possible breakthrough energy technology experiment. They launched a 12-mile-long electrical conductor cable called an electrodynamic tether, designed to collect high-energy electrons in the Earth's ionosphere and magnetic fields. The motion of the conductor tether across the Earth's magnetic fields induces a voltage along the 12-mile length of the tether. Utilizing estimates in the charge densities of the Earth's magnetic fields and the ionosphere, the voltage produced is expected to be up to several hundred volts per kilometer. If successful, the experiment could produce a lot of electrical power. If additional power is driven along the tether in the opposite direction to that which it normally wants to flow, the tether, in theory, could push, creating propulsion against the Earth's gravity to raise the shuttle's orbit. The advantage to this revolutionary technology in propulsion is that it does not require any rocket fuel. If successful, electrodynamic tethers could prove a way to greatly reduce the cost of in-space propulsion. For example, the International Space Station could keep itself in orbit, saving nearly $2 billion in orbital reboost rocket fuel for every 10 years of the station's operations. But on February 25th, after the 12-mile tether began producing electricity, an unexpected overload of electrical energy fluctuating between 2 and 10 times that predicted, due to inaccurate estimates in the electrical charge of the Earth's magnetic fields, ionosphere, and possibly space radiation, fried the tether conductor cable and it broke, severing it from the space shuttle.
The tether has broken at the boom. The tether has broken and is going away from us. Get it on the TV, Claude. Please get it on the TV. The tether has broken.
Copy.
Columbia and the satellite now 77 nautical miles apart. Again, that call reporting that the crew can see the tether and see the satellite. It's beautiful. This view showing the satellite. Again, just moving into sunrise. 81 nautical miles now from Columbia.
getting the image?
Franklin, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground. Can you describe what you're seeing?
Well, the long line is a tether, and there's a little bit of debris that kind of flies with us, and it's illuminated by the sun at such low angle. So there's a lot of stray light, and it's getting washed out quickly, but Claude is trying to do a quick, good job here adjusting the cameras.
Copy that.
In that description by the crew, this is the tether in the satellite with approximately 12 miles of tether still attached to it. Columbia and the satellite are now just passing over the west coast of northern Africa. The two spacecraft are now 90 nautical miles apart. Controllers for the satellite did have communications with it during the close pass between Columbia and the satellite.
Columbia, Houston, that's a much better view, a lot more contrast visible. And how wide does that tether appear to be? It seems to resemble a much wider strand than we'd expect. Can you describe which way the satellite is visible on that strand?
Satellite now 100 nautical miles.
Charlie, completely unzoomed, and you see the full extent of the tether. I tried to adjust the focus, but I can't get better than that.
Okay, Claude. Thank you.
I'm going to zoom in now.
In the summer of 1999, I met with Martin Stubbs, the program manager of the cable TV station, who had recorded over 400 hours of NASA's live broadcasts. He gave me some videotape on a new incident that happened in February of 1996 on Space Shuttle mission STS-75, what was called the Tether incident. So what you just saw on the videotape showed a 12-mile-long satellite, a satellite attached to a 12-mile-long tether, which is like a conductor cable. It's a very, very thin, 1/10 of a centimeter in thickness cable that was used to conduct electricity in the Earth's ionosphere. As we saw earlier, space is supercharged with high-energy particles, and NASA was trying to take advantage of these particles to see if they could build up a charge on the tether and actually see a gain or produce some electricity. They charged the tether with some electricity, but then an overload of highly charged particles flooded the tether and produced so much electricity it snapped. On February 25th at about 7:30 p.m., the tether broke away from the shuttle Columbia and drifted about 77 miles away. So the scene that you just saw actually starts at about 77 miles away. The camera pans down. We see a long line, which is 12 miles long of tether, a small satellite attached to the end, and then a swarm of little objects, little balls of light, just moving in from all different directions in different velocities and different speeds. Then the cameras actually zoom in, and we actually get to take a close look at what we're seeing here. It's astounding. We see up here in the right-hand corner, we see a very large disk clearly going behind the tether. And we can actually see little black dots racing around to suggest some sort of a magnetic field effect. And coming through the middle, we see another very large disk moving clearly behind the tether. The light from the tether shines in front of the background object, which is the UFO. If we use this piece of wood as an example, we can see what a disk looks like when it's passing behind a foreground object. It's really very quite simple. So if the disk was passing in front of the tether, it would look something like this, and it doesn't look like that. When we look in the middle and we see this large disk passing through the middle, we can see again it's passing behind the tether. If this was the tether and this was the UFO, we could clearly see it's going behind. And if it was going in front, it would look something like this. It doesn't look like that. So because we know the shuttle is at least 77 miles away and drifting further away from the object, from the tether, and we know the objects are going behind the tether, we can therefore use the 12-mile length of the tether as a relative measuring rod for actually making measurements of the minimum diameters of some of these disks. And according to my calculations, against the 12-mile length of the tether, this disk passing through the top section here measures a minimum of 2 to 3 miles in diameter. That's assuming it's right up next to the back of the tether. If it's actually farther behind the tether than I think, then the disk could be much, much larger. The further it gets behind it relative to the distance of the tether, the larger it actually is in reality and compared to measuring it against the tether. Again here, this disk going through the middle here, I estimate it to be between 2 and 3 miles in diameter. If a UFO were flying over the city of Los Angeles in the downtown core or New York, and it was 2 to 3 miles wide in diameter, it would black out the entire sky. It would be an Independence Day sized craft that would literally cause massive panic and massive alarm. But again, when you consider that the cameras on the space shuttle here are seeing into the near ultraviolet spectrum of light, as we learned earlier, it's a spectrum of light that's too high in energy for us to see with our eyes. But because the camera can see into it, it can basically be capable of capturing an image that is so high in energy that although we can't see with our eyes, it actually still is there. We just can't actually see it. Earlier I suggested how if a UFO were capable of doing light speed travel, a solid object initially, and it could change its frequency into high frequency energy, the UFO would still, or spaceship would still have actual structure to it. It would actually still have mass, but in its high frequency state it would turn into pure energy. Therefore, as it would appear on a camera, it would be very translucent. It would look like energy even though it has structure. And that's exactly what these objects look like. They look like almost transparent, translucent disks, which actually, as they pass behind some background stars, you can actually see starlight shining through them to suggest that they're in a pure wave or energy form. So, and again, this one, we can see the actual magnetic field rotating very, very quickly around the craft, suggesting that what we're looking at is pure energy, mass vibrating at a very high frequency. Across the top of the screen, we can see a very powerful pulsing coming off of one of the UFOs as it moves across the screen. Later, I would look very closely at the wave patterns on the UFO and study the wave patterns and find some incredible, incredible conclusions, incredible quantum physics and quantum energy equations. But we'll look at that much later. For now, we're left with the most astounding event ever captured on film. The largest UFOs ever captured on film, 2 to 3 miles in diameter, and quite conclusive. They're definitely going behind the tether. They can't be produced by some sort of an optical illusion. If this is the tether way in the background and the camera to the space shuttle is way up here, you can get a really bad reading against using the tether, the 12-mile length of the tether, as any sort of relative measuring rod. But I'm not doing that. We are confirming, and it's very obvious when you look at the tape, that the UFOs are going behind the tether. On February 28, 1996, United Press International published an article, Satellite Signals a Puzzle, mystifying the STS-75 tether incident. When the astronauts were actually able to regain contact with the tethered satellite, they found several unexplainable surprises. The article states, "There has been an event on the satellite that we do not understand yet," astronaut David Wolf told the Columbia crew. First, radio signals from the satellite caused engineers some surprise. The configuration of several systems had changed from when NASA lost contact with the craft on Sunday. For example, the spacecraft's nitrogen fuel tank was emptied and its steering thruster valves were opened. In addition, a gyroscope that had been left on was powered off, while 2 other gyroscopes remained on. All of these incidents require electronic, remote control commands from the astronauts on the shuttle. But if the astronauts did not make these commands, then who or what did? Could it have been the unidentified flying object that took over the controls of the satellite? So take a look at the tape again and see for yourself if some of the things I'm saying are not true. Dear Mr. Sarita, if the phenomena is interesting enough to deserve an investigation, then our preference would be for controlled experiments that closely duplicate the circumstances of the original observations and test our working hypotheses until they are either verified or falsified. A second line of investigation would be to obtain more evidence of the original sightings. For example, additional shuttle camera tapes. There are at least 4 mounted in the bay, to see if the same objects were seen on these. If these objects were large, then the same object would appear on 2 or more cameras, and these can be used to triangulate the distance from the shuttle to the object. If there are no objects that appear simultaneously on 2 or more cameras, then one must conclude that the objects seen in the near fields of the individual cameras and the dust bunny hypotheses get stronger. I would ask that you apply this line of reasoning and the test proposed in my last email and above to the evidence in hand to see which more consistently explains the observations. Signed, Dr. Joseph Newth. Dear Mr. Sarita, I received your package, but other duties have kept me from watching the tape you sent. I must admit that I am somewhat reluctant to begin another dialogue with you on this subject, as our last discussion nearly resulted in a formal Freedom of Information Act request on an area in which I have no formal responsibility or specialized NASA knowledge. I do not mind responding to inquiries from the public, since I feel that this is part of my job as a government employee. However, I really have little interest in getting into battles when my honest attempts to answer your questions do not seem to agree with what you want me to say. My personal home VCR has been broken for a while, and I have not yet had time to borrow one. When I do, I will let you know what I think that I see in the tape. Signed, Dr. Joseph Newth III. You're about to see what is called the star sequence. It's a very simple scene. The space shuttle's cameras are looking down at the Earth. The space shuttle is about 300 miles above the Earth, and we're looking down. We see a couple of fuzzy lights that are kind of curve-shaped. And then we see a light going by, floating right by them. And then we see another one. And then we actually hear the astronauts talking and saying, I see a light going by in the ground down there. And there's a long pause. And then we hear, it could have been a star, Bill. And after that, we see a few more of these things going by. So we know between the space shuttle and the Earth, there's no stars. The sun is the nearest star in the solar system. So we know that this isn't actually a star going by on the ground because we're looking right down at the Earth. There's no space between the space shuttle and the Earth where a star could possibly appear. So obviously the word star is code for something. But code for what? Is it code for the word UFO?
You see another light going by on the ground there. It could have been a star, Bill.
Hey, Roger.
Okay, Bill, I'm going to switch tapes on you now and give you a daylight view here.
Okay, and one last question before you do that, Mario. Could you tell in this if the red Stimpsonite is on the left?
I believe it was, based upon what I saw in the day imagery, because it remained very stable.
On STS-80, if we look here, what you're about to see, this is the Earth down here. One of the first things you'll see on the screen is a little pulsing object. It's actually quite big. It's around that big. Moving over here, and then you'll see it actually change directions and go out into space. But that's not what we're looking for. In the middle of the screen, slowly, you'll see a very big kind of translucent ball with a hole in the middle, very similar to the rest of our UFOs, kind of streaking by and going into the distance. And slowly, 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 as it goes into the distance, you can see it getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So we were experiencing the depth of field of one of these large disks as it's moving past, way, way past the space shuttle and into the far distance. It basically reaches a point, and once it reaches this point of its destination, it stops moving, and then it becomes extra luminous. It starts to give off some extra light. And slowly what we start to see is a formation, an actual circular formation, kind of looking at an angle into this formation. We can see these objects that are slowly moving into position and then actually lighting up. Once they hit their positions, they're lighting up. This is suggesting incredible intelligence, something you wouldn't expect for space debris or space junk or some sort of natural phenomena. You certainly couldn't expect that meteorites or shooting stars could fly through space and then stop at a point and then all of a sudden give off this extra luminosity. The luminosity is constant once they start giving it off. As the camera starts to slowly go away and it's moving over the curvature of the Earth, we see more and more of these things coming into position, and then once they reach their positions, they light off. And then, finally, we see another object, kind of like this one, coming in from the foreground and heading towards the center of the circle. It becomes very, very faint. You can barely see it on the screen as it's moving into position. And finally, when it gets into what appears to be the center of the circle, it literally just starts shining like a diamond. And its light is luminous and continuous. This whole formation suggests amazing intelligence and amazing organization. Could this be something staged by NASA? Or could these actually be UFOs? We see two of our very familiar looking disc-shaped objects coming into position here and here on your video monitor. One comes in from one direction and one comes in from another direction. And then we hear a go for wake shield. That's something that one of the people from Huntsville, Alabama say on the radio. And then they just literally, after we hear go for wake shield, they just literally bolt out into space and disappear in a matter of a second or two.
Yes, for wake shield.
So I researched what wake shield was because I thought maybe this had something to do with, again, a black ops test or some sort of a test that NASA was doing out there. Wake shield has nothing to do with these two things. Wake shield is actually a satellite used for growing pure crystals in the wake of the satellite. When the satellite actually travels through space and it's moving, it actually produces a wake just like a boat does on a lake. And inside the wake, they grow very high quality crystals for, computer chips and semiconductors. So wake shield has literally nothing to do with the two objects you're seeing. The objects are probably unidentified flying objects or UFOs.